Hey guys, tonight we slip into a world where your spine bends more than your pride. Or maybe exactly as much. You're 60 years old, and the first time you dip your head towards someone, barely out of college, the air feels different, thicker, like it's made of invisible judgment. Their sneakers are spotless, their smile faintly smug, and your knees creak in protest as you bow. The room goes quiet. Or maybe it just feels that way because you can hear your own thoughts saying, "Wait, when did I start doing this? You probably won't survive this well socially anyway," without picking up a few new coping skills. But we're here for the slow burn, the awkward laughs, and that deliciously uncomfortable mix of dignity and absurdity. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always fun to see where and when you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first time you bow, it's not just muscle memory, it's muscle confusion. Your back stiffens. Your mind flashes to every handshake and nod of your youth, where you were the one people adjusted their posture for. Back then, you were the storm in the room, respected, consulted, maybe even feared a little. Now the storm has passed, and you're the tree that bends in the wind. Except the wind is wearing ripped jeans and checking their phone mid-conversation. You notice everything. The way their eyes barely meet yours, like they've been briefed that your deference is standard of protocol. The angle of your own bow feels like a mathematical equation you didn't study for. Too shallow, and you look insincere. Too deep, and you risk looking desperate. Somewhere in between, there's an elusive perfect bow, but no one tells you when you've nailed it. A mainstream historical fact drifts through your mind. In feudal Japan, bows weren't just politeness, they were social currency. Samurai could tell your rank and intentions by the depth and speed of your movement. Back then, every bow was a conversation in itself. Now, in your modern little world, you wonder if the 20-year-old even notices the nuance. Here's a quirky tidbit. Your very first bow was so hesitant, your old friend later told you it looked like you were trying to spot a stain on your shirt. That's the kind of feedback only a lifelong companion will deliver, usually while laughing over tea. But here's where historians, or maybe social scientists, still argue: is respect always earned, or can it be demanded by circumstance? In your case, the bow isn't about admiration for the person. It's about acknowledging the system you're living in. It's a subtle but powerful difference, and one that keeps you awake later that night, replaying the scene in your head like a movie you didn't enjoy but can't stop watching. The soundscape of that moment stays with you, a faint shuffle of shoes, the echo of your own breath, and that peculiar silence that follows when a room sees something it's not quite used to. Even your own hands don't know what to do. Clasped in front feels submissive. Hanging at your sides feels awkward behind your back, makes you look like you're about to lecture someone. You settle for a half clasp that feels neither here nor there, which is probably how you feel in this entire exchange. Later, you catch yourself in a shop window, miming the bow to figure out what went wrong. You're aware that anyone watching must think you're stretching a sore neck. Maybe you are. but you're also stretching into a new role, one you didn't audition for, but somehow landed. And deep down, beneath the pride, beneath the sigh, you know this was only the first. There will be more bows. Some will feel lighter, others heavier. And before the night ends, you'll wonder if this act of bending is breaking you, or just reshaping you into someone new. Life before the bow feels like a different lifetime entirely, though in truth, it's just a handful of years ago. You wake in the memory as if it's a dream. Sunlight spilling through the curtains, your calendar filled with people coming to you for answers. Back then, when you walked into a room, conversation shifted. People leaned in. Your opinion had a gravitational pull, and the idea of lowering yourself physically or otherwise to someone whose life experience could be measured in semesters unthinkable. You stroll through that past like a favorite neighborhood familiar, comfortable, maybe a little idealized. The coffee tastes better. The chair you sit in feels like a throne, and the faces around you carry an expression you now recognize as expectant deference. You weren't arrogant exactly, just used to the order of things. 60 meant authority, and authority meant standing tall. The moments replay in sharp detail, the younger coworkers who stood when you entered a meeting, the way your nieces and nephews seemed shy in your presence until you softened the edges with a joke, the nods from strangers who assumed just by your age that you knew what you were doing. It wasn't constant glory, but it was a steady hum of acknowledgement, a soundtrack you didn't realize was playing until it stopped. Here's your mainstream historical fact for the night in ancient Rome. The older members of the Senate were revered not only for their political acumen, but simply for surviving into their later years. Age was considered a visible badge of wisdom. A senator with white hair wasn't pitied, he was listened to. And here's a quirky tidbit. You once had a neighbor in your 40s who called you sir every single time he saw you, even when you were both in pajamas at the corner shop. At the time, it felt unnecessary. Now, you think about finding him just to thank him for the free dignity. Scientists still argue whether respect for elders is a natural human instinct or a cultural construct. You lean toward the latter because you've watched it vanish faster than morning dew on a summer road. It's not that young people are incapable of respect. It's that the system they grew up in doesn't demand it the way yours did. In your mind's theater, you play the last scene from your pre-bow life. It's a staff meeting. You're at the head of the table, speaking without rushing, letting pauses sit like punctuation marks that everyone respects. You finish your thought, and there's a ripple of agreement around the room. That was the old normal. Then, like a slow fade out, it all changes. You don't remember the exact moment the hierarchy tilted. Maybe it was a change in leadership. Maybe it was a generational shift, so gradual you didn't feel the slope until you were already sliding. But one day, you stood and no one else did. You spoke, and people glanced at their phones. The soundtrack stopped. Now, when you look back, the contrast is almost absurd. You once moved through life like a captain steering a familiar ship. Now, you feel like a passenger who has to nod politely to the 20-year-old at the helm, hoping they've read the map. It doesn't make you bitter, not exactly. But it does make the present harder to swallow. You cling to the taste of those older days, the weight of being the one people deferred to. Like a favorite coat that no longer fits you, still reach for it, sometimes forgetting that the sleeves are too short for who you are now. And somewhere in the middle of this nostalgia, you realize the past isn't coming back. Not in the same form. You can remember it, even honor it, but you can't live there. Which means, whether you like it or not, the bowing life is here to stay, at least for now. The first time it happens, you think it's a joke. You're standing there in the corridor, halfway between the coffee machine and the meeting room, when a young man barely out of university steps in front of you. He's beaming with that unshakable confidence of someone who hasn't yet failed spectacularly in public. He says something brisk, some quick instruction about moving schedules around, and then gestures toward you in a way that feels off. It's not disrespectful exactly, but it's not the kind of thing you'd expect aimed at a person with 4 decades more mileage on the road of life. And then comes the moment. You bow your head slightly without thinking to acknowledge his position. It's quick, barely a dip. If anyone else noticed, they didn't say a word. But you feel it. That small bend at the neck, the shift in your spine, the unspoken yes in your body language. It's like muscle memory you didn't know you had. And the weirdest part, it's over in a second, but it leaves a trace. Mainstream, historical fact in feudal Japan bowing wasn't just politeness, it was currency. The depth, length, and angle of a bow communicated status, intent, even apology. Samurai bowed differently to lords than to merchants, and those distinctions mattered. What you just did in that hallway, it had the faint echo of that kind of code. Quirky tidbit. You once read about a man in Victorian England who bowed to his cat every morning, claiming it kept the household in balance. You used to laugh at that. Now you wonder if the cat ever laughed back. You try to shake it off. Maybe it was just you being polite, old habits of courtesy spilling out. But a week later, it happens again. Different 20-year-old, same subtle nod. The air around them has that hum of fresh authority. You don't resent them. Personally. They're doing their job, stepping into the roles the world handed them. But each time you bow, you feel a little like you're handing over a page from your own story. Scientists still argue whether body language shapes social order or simply reflects it. You suspect it's both. That small bow. It's not just a response, it's reinforcement. And once it starts, it's hard to stop. You remember when respect used to be signaled the other way around. Younger people made space for elders in the conversation, let them speak first, even if only as a gesture. Now, you find yourself adjusting, waiting for them to lead, nodding in agreement, even when you'd phrase it differently. You tell yourself you're being adaptable, flexible. But there's a quiet voice at the back of your mind that whispers, this is you learning a new pecking order. It's not all grim. Sometimes the bow earns you an unexpected smile, a quick word of thanks, even a rare, I really appreciate you. There's a strange power in letting someone else take the front seat. But you also feel the weight of each repetition. It's a new chapter you didn't choose, written in a language you're still translating. You catch yourself in the mirror one afternoon post-bow, and there's a look you don't quite recognize. Not defeat exactly, more like recalibration. As if your face is trying on this new role to see if it fits. And you can't tell yet whether it's going to pinch or stretch in all the wrong places. That's the thing about first times, they're small, almost forgettable in the moment. But later, when the pattern repeats, you look back and realize that was the start. That was the quiet handshake between the old order and the new. That was the day you bent your head and a little bit of your world bent with it. It's one thing to bow in a hallway. It's another to sit at a table and feel the tide of conversation pulling away from you. You're at a long meeting, one of those sessions where everyone is supposed to share updates, but the energy is skewed. The 20-year-olds speak quickly, confidently, sometimes with jargon, so fresh it hasn't even made it into dictionaries yet. You're still trying to work out if pivot the synergy is a business plan or a yoga move. You lean back listening. There's no malice here, it's just speed. They volley ideas like ping-pong balls barely stopping to breathe. When one of them glances at you, you nod, adding a quiet good point when you can wedge it in. And then it happens again. Your head dips, your posture shifts forward the bow, but this time seated. It feels strange that this small movement has become so natural. In another era, your era, respect in the room, was about waiting for the elder to speak. The younger ones leaned in their pens, poised ready for the voice of experience. Now, you're the one leaning forward, offering affirmations like seasoning sprinkled on a dish someone else is cooking. Mainstream historical fact. In many indigenous councils, elders traditionally held the floor until they passed it willingly. Their experience was seen as the foundation of decision-making. The idea that someone barely older than a summer intern could lead such a council would have been unthinkable. Quirky tidbit. In 18th century France, fashionable salons often had a chair of honor for the eldest guest, except one hostess who reversed the rule entirely, putting the youngest guest in that seat to encourage fresh thinking. It caused a minor scandal. You think she might have been onto something, or maybe she just liked chaos. Scientists still argue whether hierarchy naturally flips with each generation, or whether it's a recent speed of change phenomenon. You lean toward the latter. In your lifetime, you've watched technology fold and refold the map of authority so quickly that the ink never fully dries. In the meeting, your role becomes clear. You're the anchor, not the sail. You keep the ship steady, while the younger ones test the wind. It's not a bad role. Sometimes, you even enjoy it watching them make the same rookie mistakes you once did, fighting the same invisible dragons. But then there's the subtle shift. You realize you've stopped offering course corrections. Not because you've lost the knowledge, but because you've learned it's not always wanted. And so the bow becomes more than physical. It's the bowing out, the step back, the decision to let them steer, even if they're heading for choppy waters. The irony is, they might not even notice. To them, you're just being polite. You're letting them lead. They might even think you prefer it this way. And in moments, maybe you do. But under the surface, there's a quiet negotiation happening, a trade between visibility and peace. After the meeting, one of the younger leads thanks you for being so supportive. You smile, accept the compliment, and wonder if they'll ever realize that support sometimes feels like surrender. And as you walk out, you catch yourself straightening your shoulders, lifting your chin just a bit higher. The bow happens in the room, but out here in the hallway, you still stand at your full height. You wake up the next morning with the meeting still looping in your head like a song you didn't choose. Sunlight is filtering through the curtains, hitting the dust motes in the air, and you realize, before your feet even touch the floor, that today is another day where bows will happen. You can feel it in your bones the same way you can tell if rain's coming. Breakfast is quiet. The tea is hot. The bread's a little stale, and you find yourself practicing the day's first nod over the rim of your cup. Not on purpose. It's just habit now, like a morning stretch. Later, you're in the elevator, riding up with a group of interns. They're dressed in casual confidence hoodies, sneakers, haircuts that look accidental, but definitely weren't. They're talking over each other, laughing at references you only half recognize. A meme, a show, some viral clip. You're about to ask when the doors open and they spill out still talking. You bow your head slightly as they pass polite automatic. None of them notice. Mainstream historical fact. In Tokugawa era, Japan, bowing etiquette was so precise that a person's social rank could be read in the depth and duration of the bow. Merchants bow differently to samurai than to fellow merchants, and to get it wrong could be considered an insult. Quirky tidbit. In the 1960s, an American theme park experimented with having employees bow to guests as part of a world culture program. The experiment lasted exactly 2 weeks. Too many visitors assumed the bowing staff were mocking them. Sometimes, gestures don't translate. Scientists still argue whether bowing is hardwired into human interaction as a universal gesture of respect, or whether it's purely cultural conditioning. You think it's both. But here's the twist. These days, the bow seems less about the other person's status and more about the pace of the moment. You're bowing to keep the flow going, to avoid being the stone that stops the stream. In the office, the bow comes again, this time at a shared desk. A 22-year-old designer slides a project mock-up your way, and you lean in knitting. Looks good, you say. She beams her earbuds still in. You're not sure she even heard you, but the nod lands. It's strange how something as small as a lowered head can hold so much. It's permission, it's blessing. It's an invisible handshake, and yet it's also weight. You can feel it collecting in your neck and shoulders like carrying a pack you didn't agree to wear. By mid-afternoon, you've bowed so many times that you start to imagine you're living in some old black and white newsreel about diplomacy. You half expect subtitles to appear under you. Elder negotiates peace through nodding. You smirk at the thought, which earns a confused look from someone passing by. And then, out of nowhere, there's a small reversal. The young IT guy, barely old enough to rent a car, pauses at your desk, gives you a quick nod, and says, "Hey, thanks for always being cool about stuff." It's casual, tossed out like a crumpled receipt, but you feel it. The bow aimed back at you. It's not the same as it once was. No ceremony, no clear recognition of what you've lived through, but it's something. You tuck it away small, but shining like a coin you don't spend. By the time you leave for the day, the cycle feels complete. You've bowed, you've been bowed to. Maybe not equally, but enough to keep the balance from tipping too far. Still, as you walk out into the fading light, you think about what balance really means. Is it about equal gestures, equal respect, or is it about deciding quietly how much of yourself you're willing to give to keep the peace? The street smells faintly of roasted chestnuts from a vendor's cart, and for a moment, You're not thinking about age or rank or respect at all. You're just another person in the crowd, moving forward, chin-level eyes open. The bows can wait until tomorrow. You've started to recognize them, the 20-year-old elite. Not an official club, of course. No secret handshakes, no matching jackets. But you can spot them from across a room, the way you can spot a flock of starlings. They move differently. They talk differently. And they have that unmistakable air of people who've never once worried about being taken seriously. This morning, you're at a team briefing. The leader, barely out of college, leans casually against the desk while explaining the new direction in a tone that's half pep talk, half TED talk. Around you, the room nods along like it's gospel. You catch yourself nodding too, mostly because it's easier than explaining that you've seen 6 new directions come and go already. Mainstream historical fact. In the courts of Renaissance Europe, it wasn't uncommon for teenagers from noble families to outrank older, more experienced courtiers simply because of bloodline. A 15-year-old duke could give orders to a 50-year-old knight. Age bowed to lineage. Quirky tidbit. There's a bird called the superb lyrebird that can perfectly mimic chainsaws, camera shutters, and even human voices. It doesn't matter if the bird has lived through any of those things, it copies them flawlessly and still commands attention. You can't help but think of certain 20-year-olds that way. Scientists still argue whether confidence in youth is the product of evolutionary advantage, nature, ensuring the next generation can take risks, or just the byproduct of a culture that celebrates novelty over experience. You're leaning toward the second theory, at least on days like this. During a break, you overhear a group of them talking. The topics jump from crypto trends to oat milk brands to a documentary that changed their life. You sip your tea and try to keep your eyebrows neutral. They speak quickly, throwing references like darts, and you feel the generational gap in the space between their words. But it's not all eye rolls. One of them, a sharp-eyed woman with a messy bun, asks you about a project from back in the day, her curiosity genuine. You describe it, and her attention doesn't waver. It's the first time all morning you feel like more than part of the scenery. Later, a 20-year-old with an immaculate fade haircut stops you in the hallway. Hey, I heard you used to work with... He names someone from your past, someone who was a big deal once. You confirm it, and suddenly you're being peppered with questions. For a moment, you're not bowing, you're being sought out. Still, the balance tilts back quickly. At the end of the day, the youngest team member delivers the final summary, and everyone applauds. You clap along, your hands making the same sound as theirs, but yours carry decades. Walking home, you replay the scenes, the bows, the moments of interest, the way their authority is effortless, untested, yet accepted without hesitation. You wonder if this is what elders in every era have felt, the slow shifting of the ground beneath their feet as the young step forward. The evening air smells faintly of rain, and you find yourself smiling. Not because you've solved it, but because you know the game now. You've mapped the terrain. Tomorrow, you'll bow when you must hold your head high when you can. And maybe, just maybe, let them see the weight of years as something more than a bend in the neck. It's market day in your neighborhood, the kind of place where the stalls have been in the same spot for decades, though the faces behind them keep getting younger. You stroll past the spice cellar, the bread cart, the stall that somehow still stocks cassette tapes, and end up at the vegetable stand. The vendor, 20 years old, give or take, with arms like he's been lifting sacks of onions since birth. He greets you with a broad grin and calls you sir in a tone that's halfway between respect and "you remind me of my dad." You hand over your list and he moves quickly, bagging produce while telling you about the new way to store herbs. It's a tip you learned in 1987. You nod anyway, letting him enjoy the performance. Mainstream historical fact. In ancient Rome, market stalls were sometimes handed down within families, but it wasn't unusual for a young heir to take over while their parents or grandparents were still alive, often leading to situations where the elder ended up working under the younger. Quirky tidbit. There's a species of fish, the wrasse, where some individuals change sex depending on the needs of the group. Nature sometimes reshuffles roles faster than we do, though not always as gracefully. Scientists still argue whether markets are better run by younger traders quick to adapt to trends or older ones who rely on decades of buyer trust. Standing here watching the kid hand you your change, you suspect the real answer is both. You move on to the bakery. The girl behind the counter is new, her hair tucked under a linen cap, her smile all eagerness. You order your usual, and she offers you a sample of something innovative. It's just sourdough with cinnamon, but you thank her like she's invented sliced bread. At the tea stall, you meet the youngest merchant, yet barely 20, hawking a blend of leaves and dried fruit that he insists will change your life. You buy a small pouch, not because you believe him, but because you remember being 20 and certain the world was about to be improved by your own two hands. By the time you've made your rounds, your bag is heavy, your wallet light, and your head filled with the chatter of a dozen youthful voices. Each transaction, a small bow, not a deep one, just enough to keep the day moving. On the way home, you stop at a bench to rest. Across the street, a young street musician plays an old song, one you haven't heard in years. His fingers slip over the strings in the same places yours once did when you were learning. You watch him, the tilt of his head, the half smile when he gets it right. For a moment, you forget about the bowing. You just listen. The melody is thin but bright, carried on air that smells faintly of rosemary and fresh bread. And you think maybe this is what it's about. The 20-year-olds take the stage. The 60-year-olds take the seat and both get a piece of the song. When you finally stand, you pass the musician and drop a coin into his case. He nods, still playing. No bow, no words. Just music crossing the space between your years. You're sitting in the corner of a bustling office, the kind where everything hums, not just from the lights overhead, but from the constant rhythm of keyboards and coffee mugs. You've been here long enough to remember when the fax machine was the cutting-edge lifeline, and you still have the reflex to save files twice in case the power goes out. Across from you, the team lead 22, fresh out of university, gestures at a screen explaining a new workflow strategy. You nod politely, though the strategy is just the old one in a different font. You catch yourself leaning forward, tempted to say so, but decide against it. People learn best when they think they've discovered something on their own. Mainstream historical fact. In medieval guilds, apprentices often took on leadership roles once they'd mastered their craft. sometimes even directing older members who had taught them. It wasn't about disrespect. It was about passing the torch while the flame was still strong. Quirky tidbit. In the 19th century, British lighthouse keepers had an unofficial rule: whoever climbed the stairs fastest at the start of a shift decided the day's tasks. Speed trumped age every time, leading to some awkward tea breaks later. Scientists still argue whether innovation truly belongs to the young, or if it just appears that way because younger minds tend to challenge tradition more openly. Sitting here watching your lead's hands slice through the air in confident arcs, you think it's less about age and more about stamina. They have it. You remember having it too. Midway through the meeting, there's a glitch in the software. The room freezes. Your lead frowns, clicks furiously. You quietly suggest a fix. It works instantly. A murmur of gratitude rolls across the room, and for a brief second, you're not bowing. You're the pillar holding the whole thing steady. After the meeting, your lead thanks you. It's quick, casual, but there's an edge of real respect there. You realize respect isn't about hierarchy anymore. It's about solving the problem in the moment. On your way out, a coworker, 25, perpetually caffeinated, asks you for a story about the old days of the company. You tell them about the time someone accidentally faxed the lunch menu to a major client, and the client actually placed an order for 2 soups and a sandwich. The whole office bursts into laughter, the sound rising above the hum. You don't mind bowing in moments like this. It's not deference. It's just making space for someone else to lead while you enjoy the long view. Later at your desk, you catch the young lead glancing your way, a look that says, "I know you've seen more than I have." And you smile to yourself because you know that's enough. The train ride home is long enough to let your thoughts wander. You've got your favorite seat, the one by the window, where the glass rattles just enough to lull you into a kind of moving meditation. Outside, the city lights blink in patterns you've been watching for decades, like old friends waving from the platform. Across the aisle sits a group of young interns from some tech firm, all in their 20s, wearing sneakers so bright they could be seen from space. They're talking about disrupting industries and pivoting strategies. Their words sharp and confident, like they've just mapped the future between sips of cold brew. You catch yourself smiling, not because you're mocking them, but because you remember what it felt like to believe the world was yours to reprogram. Mainstream historical fact. In ancient Rome, younger senators often introduced bold reforms, while the older statesmen nodded along, pretending to be skeptical, but secretly taking notes. The balance kept the republic from becoming stagnant, at least for a while. Quirky tidbit. In the 18th century, Parisian watchmakers used to stage public speed assembly contests. The youngest often won, not because they were better craftsmen, but because their eyesight hadn't yet betrayed them. Scientists still argue whether wisdom naturally slows action or simply makes you choose your battles more carefully. Watching these interns, you think it's a little of both. You've learned when to step in and when to let the train keep rolling. The conversation across the aisle turns to a crisis. Their presentation tomorrow is missing a key chart and the software keeps crashing. You lean over just slightly and say, "Try exporting the slides as images. It won't crash." They blink surprised you were even listening. One of them tries it on their laptop. Success. Relief spreads like a warm drink through their little group. By the time the train reaches the last stop, they thank you not with a casual cheers, but with genuine gratitude. And as you step off, you realize that bowing to younger people doesn't have to feel like lowering yourself. It can be like bending a branch so the next fruit can grow. You walk home under the streetlights, their glow softer than it used to be. Or maybe your eyes are just slower to catch it now. Either way, you think of the interns and their bright sneakers running into tomorrow, and you smile because you remember running too. The next morning starts with that faint, stubborn ache in your knees, the one that arrives before the sun, and reminds you of every step you've ever taken. You shuffle into the kitchen, kettle in hand, only to find your granddaughter already there, leaning against the counter in a hoodie that swallows her whole frame. She's 20, same age as the interns from the train, hair still damp from a too-late shower. She's scrolling through something on her phone, thumbs moving faster than your brain can follow. Without looking up, she says, "Grandpa, can you proofread my cover letter?" And just like that, coffee takes a back seat. You sit at the table while she reads it aloud. Her voice, equal parts nervous and proud. The letter is for a junior design job full of phrases like innovative synergy and forward-thinking solutions. You remember when your own job applications were typed on clunky machines, the ribbon ink smudging on your fingers. Back then, a clean paragraph was a victory. Mainstream historical fact. In medieval guilds, apprentices had to present a masterpiece to prove they were ready for higher rank. The work was judged by older masters whose approval carried weight for a lifetime. Quirky tidbit. In Japan's Edo period, some craftsmen gave secret imperfection marks to a student's work. Tiny flaws left in on purpose, so that decades later they could point and say, "Yes, I trained that one." Scientists still argue whether mentorship works better when the teacher actively shapes the student or when they just clear obstacles from their path. You point out a few phrases that could be simpler, swapping corporate fluff for her own natural voice. Don't try to sound older, you tell her sound like you. She nods slowly, the hoodie's hood slipping back to reveal a spark in her eyes, gratitude wrapped in quiet ambition. When she finishes editing, she hugs you without warning. It's the kind of hug that says, "Thanks for making me better, but not smaller." And you think maybe this is what bowing really is, stepping aside just enough for someone else to see the stage. The kettle finally whistles, and you pour the water, the steam curling upward like a silent salute to mornings where the roles quietly reverse. The weekend creeps in with that odd mix of freedom and responsibility. Your calendar looks empty, but somehow every hour feels spoken for. Today's event is a community fundraiser at the town hall, the kind of gathering where folding chairs outnumber parking spaces and everyone brings something to the buffet table. You've been invited to help greet attendees at the entrance, a job you once assigned to junior staff without a second thought. Now, you find yourself stationed at the double doors alongside two college volunteers. They're all sharp edges and quick smiles, their matching lanyards bouncing against thrift store blazers. "Mr. Harris," one of them says, "we'll take care of the sign-in sheets. You can just welcome folks. Just welcome folks." You swallow a chuckle. 50 years ago just wasn't in your vocabulary when it came to tasks. Mainstream historical fact. In ancient Rome, public banquets often had designated greeters, slaves, or freedmen, whose role was to call out guests' names as they entered, lending a sense of grandeur and formality. Quirky tidbit. In 19th century small-town America, a similar role existed informally known as the nodder, a person who simply stood at the door and nodded to each guest, no words required to make everyone feel seen. Scientists still argue whether such welcoming gestures have a measurable effect on people's willingness to engage, or if they're just a pleasant, fleeting courtesy. You notice the rhythm the students create, clipboards sliding across the table, names checked off, laughter spilling between the formalities. You try matching their pace, but your voice is slower, more deliberate. When you say glad you could join us, it lands with a different weight. People linger a second longer at your greeting than at theirs. One of the volunteers catches this and leans in. "You make it feel like you really mean it," she says. You shrug. "Maybe because I do." And standing there, bowing your head slightly to each person who crosses the threshold, you realize this isn't about yielding power. It's about lending it for just a heartbeat to someone walking through the door. The smell of potluck casseroles drifts from the hall, and for a moment, you forget whose job was supposed to be just welcoming. You're exactly where you belong. Sunday morning arrives with the sun spilling through your curtains and the faint sound of church bells tumbling across the air, like a slow reminder that the week is resetting itself. You're due at the community center for the intergenerational workshop, a place where high school, seniors, and senior citizens swap skills in a sort of cultural barter. You arrive to find the space already humming with activity. A teenager in a hoodie is showing a pair of retirees how to use a smartphone app, while across the room, a gray-haired man is teaching three 20-somethings how to mend a torn seam with needle and thread. You've been assigned to a group led by a young woman named Clara, who can't be more than 21. She's teaching modern networking strategies to anyone willing to listen. You take a seat at the folding table, noticing how the chairs seem lower than they used to, or maybe your knees just protest more when you sit down. Clara begins explaining personal branding using words that sound like they belong in a foreign language. Engagement rate, SEO optimization, algorithmic reach. You nod politely, even though half of it feels like trying to read a map in the dark. Mainstream historical fact. During the Renaissance, apprenticeships often paired young tradespeople with seasoned masters, but the exchange wasn't one way. Older artisans would sometimes adopt new techniques brought by their youthful apprentices, blending tradition with innovation. Quirky tidbit. In the 1970s, a small village in Italy held annual swap schools where children taught elders how to play pinball or operate cassette players in exchange for lessons in pasta making or regional dances. Scientists still argue whether learning from someone much younger boosts cognitive flexibility in the long term, or if it simply keeps you socially nimble. Halfway through the session, Clara asks for volunteers to role-play, introducing themselves at a networking event. She looks at you expectantly. You give a theatrical sigh. "Only if I can use my best radio announcer voice." The group laughs, and you ham it up. "Good evening, folks. I'm Harris, purveyor of fine wit and dubious wisdom." Even Clara cracks a smile. When the workshop ends, Clara thanks you for keeping things lively. You realize that while you bowed to her authority as the leader, you also left your fingerprint on the session, less about hierarchy, more about meeting in the middle. Walking home, you think about how the bow you give to someone younger isn't just a nod to their moment. It's also a way to open the door for your own learning. And maybe in the long arc of a life, that's one of the sharpest survival skills you can keep. The late afternoon light has that honey gold slant to it as you walk into your granddaughter's university campus for the Generations in Dialogue panel. You've been invited as one of the elder voices, though. Judging from the event poster, the panel is headlined by two 20-year-old social activists who've already done more press interviews than you have birthday candles. Inside the auditorium, rows of young faces turn toward you, some curious, some politely blank. A few glowing with that unshakable certainty that only comes with youth. You take your place on stage between a retired school principal and a student council president wearing a bright saffron scarf. When the moderator invites opening remarks, the young activist to your left launches into a passionate call for systemic change, her words moving fast and sharp. The audience cheers. When it's your turn, you clear your throat and start slower, with the kind of measured rhythm you've learned draws people in rather than overwhelming them. Mainstream historical fact. In ancient Athens, public debates often paired young orators with seasoned statesmen, both to sharpen the youth's skills and to remind the elders of fresh perspectives. Quirky tidbit. In 19th century Japan, certain tea houses held wisdom evenings where elders had to bow before teenage poets before hearing their verses symbolizing humility before creativity, regardless of age. Scientists still argue whether public speaking across age gaps reduces generational bias or whether it simply makes for a lively evening without lasting effects. You recount a story from your early career when you were brash and thought you knew everything, which you say with a smirk was true, except for the part where I didn't. Laughter ripples through the crowd. The young activist next to you nods, and when she speaks again, she weaves your anecdote into her point. By the end, you've both taken questions from students and traded a few knowing smiles. You rose to speak. You listened to youth. You bowed figuratively and literally. And you left feeling that the space between ages had shrunk just enough to let understanding slip through. The invitation arrives, folded neatly inside a pale blue envelope. Its ink scripted with the kind of elegance you only see in wedding invitations or lawsuits. It's from a young colleague barely 22 who is launching her own startup and wants you to attend the opening night gala as an honored elder advisor. When you arrive, the venue is awash in bright lights, crystal glasses clinking, and a playlist so loud you feel it in your ribs. The founders, all under 25, wear sleek modern suits, their confidence radiating like neon. You and your tailored but slightly old-fashioned jacket feel like you've walked into a time warp, half guest of honor, half museum exhibit. Mainstream historical fact. In medieval guilds, master craftsmen often attended the feasts of newly minted journeymen, offering blessings and advice, sometimes even kneeling in thanks for the young blood, reinvigorating the trade. Quirky tidbit. In 18th century Venice, there was a custom where seasoned merchants would ceremonially hand over their lucky coin to a young trader on his first day of business, believing it kept fortune circulating. Scientists still argue whether rituals of symbolic humility, like bowing or gifting tokens to younger counterparts, genuinely empower the young, or simply make the elders feel generous without shifting real power. At the gala, The moment comes when you are called to the stage. You step up, accept the microphone, and right there, under the gleam of chandelier light, you bow to her. The crowd murmurs phones, snapping pictures. You say, "May your journey rise higher than mine ever did," and hand her an old brass fountain pen, the one you signed your first contract with. She beams, slipping it into her pocket as if it were a crown jewel. Later, as you mingle, people treat you not as the guest of honor or the relic in the room, but as someone who knows how to pass the torch without burning the bridge. It's a quiet afternoon when you wander into the community center's open house, mostly out of curiosity. The place is buzzing. Young volunteers in matching shirts are setting up booths for everything from coding classes to urban gardening. Someone hands you a reusable coffee cup with the center's logo, and before you can sip, a young man, 20, maybe 21, waves you over. He's leading a workshop called Bridging Generations Through Stories. The tables are set with paper pens and bowls of candy. You take a seat, unsure if you're here to listen or teach. Mainstream historical fact. In ancient China, intergenerational storytelling was a formalized tradition, often tied to the lunar calendar. Elders would share tales at specific festivals, ensuring cultural continuity. Quirky tidbit. In some rural Irish villages, elders telling long stories were given slices of bread soaked in warm milk during winter sessions, a sort of edible encouragement to keep going. Scientists still argue whether formal storytelling between generations improves empathy in measurable ways, or if the benefits are purely anecdotal and emotional. When it's your turn, you tell a story, not of kings or battles, but of your first job sweeping the floors of a shop and how you learned to listen more than you spoke. The young ones lean in, some nodding, some smiling at the small jokes you tuck in. Then at the end, the young man steps forward, thanks you publicly, and without hesitation bows. A full, deep bow. The room falls still, the gesture echoing in the space between your ribs. You stand, a little flustered, and bow back. Two arcs of gratitude meeting in the middle. The workshop empties slowly, and you find yourself sitting at the table alone, tracing the grain of the wood with your fingers. Outside, the sun is lowering the light, stretching into honeyed tones that soften every edge. The chatter from the hallway fades into a kind of pleasant hush, like the world holding its breath. You think about every bow, every moment you've tilted your head and spine towards someone younger, not as an act of surrender, but as a quiet recognition of shared humanity. Each gesture felt in its own way, like placing a stone on a bridge that might carry someone farther than you've gone. The hum of a vending machine nearby becomes your background lullaby, the sweet scent of brewed coffee still lingering in the air. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the warmth from the mug seep into your palms, and with it, the warmth of knowing you've given something away that didn't diminish you at all. Somewhere in a future, you won't see one of these young people might bow to another, and maybe they'll remember you, not your name, but the shape of your kindness. And that's enough. You exhale slow and even, feeling your breath settle. The light outside dips into a deeper gold, and the soft shuffle of distant footsteps tells you it's time to go. You rise, the old wood chair creaking in farewell, and walk toward the door without hurry. The air is cool as you step outside, the street quiet except for the whisper of leaves. And just like that, the day folds gently around you, calm and complete.